Episode 155 of the Interpretation Station is called to order. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. How are you all doing on this fine afternoon, the 10th of December? Actually, it's not particularly fine at all. It's all snowing here. It's pretty rubbish, actually. And that's why I've got nothing really better to do than to make a new Interpretation Station episode. Anyway, it's an important episode that we have got for you today. And we're not actually going to be doing a statement as we usually do, but rather we're going to be looking at a document, a letter, in fact. Yes, we're going to be breaking down a letter. Now, the subject matter is the situation in Ukraine, and the letter is a letter from the United States, from Russia, okay? Before I go on any further, please do remember to like, share, subscribe, and to comment on all the things that you find interesting, any vocabulary suggestions I make. Let me get that little formality out of the way now, just to remind you. And so, yes, this is a letter that was appended to a series of documents that was submitted in the context of a consultative meeting that was convened under Article 5 of the Biological Weapons Convention, the BWC or the BTWC if you prefer. By the way, I sometimes say this, do listen to the words that I'm using to describe the scenario, okay? I'm choosing my words very carefully because, this is the kind of language that's used, let's face it, at the UN. So the letter in question, it pertains to the whole situation that's going on within the Ukraine conflict, to do with the Biolabs, okay, the biological laboratories that have been discovered, alleged to exist over the course of the conflict in some of the biggest cities in Ukraine, including Lvov, Kharkov, Odessa, Kiev, okay? Now, I'm not here to tell you whether these allegations are true or if they're pie in the sky nonsense. That's not the interpretation station's job, okay? That's way above my pay grade, all right? I am just doing this because whether you like it or not, whether you believe it or not, this is what the Russians see as being one of the major issues, shall we say, as part of this conflict. The whole issue of what they allege to be American and Ukrainian cooperation in the sphere of the production, possibly, of biological weapons. And if the Russians believe that to be an issue, then they are going to speak about it in meetings, okay? They're going to speak about it in meetings in the Security Council, within the UN, and probably in any other forum, international forum, okay? And within the media, okay? So, like I say, whether you believe it or not, this is vocabulary that you need to know. And what really sparked my decision to look at this letter was, in fact, right now, the 9th RevCon, okay, 9th Review Conference of the Biological Weapons Convention is taking place as we speak in Geneva. So it's been going on for 2 weeks. There's one more week left in it. And on the first day of the meeting, I think I was in it, and I mean, it was very tense, you know. There's lots of accusations flying around left, right, and centre. Lots of points of order. You want to know that, by the way, in English, in Russian, okay? The word for point of order. I can't remember it now, but I'll write it down in the little box in front, okay? Lots of rights of reply, okay? That sort of thing. Very, very tense, very hostile atmosphere, shall we say. And one of the big things that obviously the Russians are pushing during this conference are these sort of allegations, okay? Now, the first place, the first forum they really put those allegations forward was during what was called a formal consultative meeting of the BWC. They called it under Article 5 of the convention. Okay, that was their point of reference. Okay, and it was only the second time in history. So this mechanism is provided for. Again, listen to the words I'm using, under Article 5, and it has only ever been invoked once in the past. Interestingly enough, that was in 1997, BWC formal consultative meeting, 25th, 27th of August in Geneva at the request of the government of Cuba. Now, it's worth perhaps knowing what that first and only other consultative meeting ever convened was about. So yeah, 97, the government of Cuba requested a formal consultative meeting to address its allegation that on October the 21st, 1996, a US government crop dusting aircraft that overflew the island en route to a coca eradication program in Colombia had released a devastating insect pest called Thrips palmi over Cuba in a scheme to cripple its agricultural economy. During the meeting, Cuba presented evidence to support its claim of a US biological attack, while the US countered that the Thrips infestation had spread naturally from nearby countries. And in fact, yes, it's useful just to know about that precedent, if you like. So I think that way was cited a couple of times in that first week of debates at the 9th RevCon, and I think the Cubans certainly made mention of it. So it's pretty rare for this thing to be invoked, and so it's a big deal when it does get invoked. So yes. So the letter that we are going to look at is what the Russians submitted as part of their evidence, I guess, part of their evidence and part, to back up their questions and their need for clarification concerning activities going on in Ukraine. And so now, obviously, this is going to be of. It's very important, I think, if you've got Russian in your combination, you work in this sphere, you're going to be the ones to benefit most of all, okay? But I think also, even if you haven't got Russian in your combination, you're going to have to relay other interpreters who are interpreting from Russian. You're going to have to relay from people like me, and obviously, the whole situation in Ukraine is obviously going to be probably on the front pages, probably in the spotlight for a long time to come. I don't think these allegations are going to go away anywhere. They're not just going to disappear magically. The likelihood is that the Russians will keep pressing them, and it's good to know because there's a lot of real technical stuff involved. We're going to names of diseases, names of institutions, names of corporations. Various hypotheses are all set out in this letter that we are about to see. And it's good just to know what to expect if you get thrown into a meeting that's obviously going to touch on some of these things. Forewarned is forearmed, as the saying goes. So with that, I'm going to share the screen with you, and we're going to not go through that letter. It's not too long. It's like a couple of pages, and I've highlighted. We're going to go sort of parallel, looking at the English and the Russian to know exactly. We're going to cross-reference to know exactly what the vocab is that we're after. So let me bring the 2 pages up on the screen. Okay, so we're going to base ourselves chiefly off the English version. There are only 2 versions. There's an English version and a Russian version. I should point out, I think the Russians had their own people translate this into English. So there's some slightly strange syntax in the English version, some slightly dubious English from time to time. But nevertheless, it's still a fairly good rendition. And as you can see here, I've highlighted quite a few bits. Okay, some in yellow, some in blue, and a tiny little bit in red. So the yellow stuff is used mostly the official names of things, like of institutions and agreements and so on. The blue, what's in blue, is more wording that I think is important. Okay, that has been wording that has been used in different meetings on different occasions, and I think it's worth being familiar with. And there's also a little bit in red, and that's a little bit of a A word that I think is important. Well, don't worry about the red for now. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it. But anyway, so I've highlighted the very first bit here. You see, this was called a formal consultative meeting of the states parties to the Convention on the Prohibition of the Development, Production and Stockpiling of Bacteriological or Biological and Toxin Weapons and on their destruction. So the first thing I'd just say is, okay, so in Russian, formal consultative meeting, официальное консультативное совещание. So the first time I run into consultative meeting, I wasn't certain whether it was consultative or advisory meeting. I hadn't never run into this mechanism before. But it is a consultative meeting. Okay, so just know that. That's the first thing. And then this is the full name of the convention. The Convention on the Prohibition of the Development, Production and Stockpiling of Biological and Toxin Weapons and on their destruction. So you can either call this in English, the acronyms. You can say the BWC, the BTWC. You can use either or here. Okay, you're perfectly fine to use either or. What's also just useful to note is that if you're working from Russian, okay, these three ideas: development, production, stockpiling. So in Russian, that is запрещение, prohibition, разработки, производства и накопления. Okay, so it's good to know what the equivalent is for development, production and stockpiling, because so if they're just talking about the convention, then you don't need to give the full name. I just say the BWC, the BTWC. Okay, but sometimes they'll use those three verbs or those three nouns, development, production, stockpile, in a slightly different context. Maybe someone will say, yes, and this convention, the reason, and we ratified this convention with the precise purpose of prohibiting the development, production and stockpiling of bacteriological weapons. So maybe that's how it will get phrased in a sentence, in which case you can't just say the BWC, you have to give the reason why the convention was ratified, and it was because once it prevented these three things. So it's good just to know what those three things are: development, production and stockpiling. You'll note that they tend to talk about biological weapons. They didn't say bacteriological weapons very much. And as I say, I'd also be inclined, if they're speaking very fast, like this guy, the Russian delegate, was speaking very fast, you see, in those meetings, the 9th of the RevCon, to say bioweapons. I think you can get away with just saying bioweapons. Okay, and that's, okay, so here I've just highlighted it again. This is the full name. So this is actually the document. Okay, questions to the US regarding compliance with the obligations under the BTWC in the context of the activities of biolaboratories in the territory of Ukraine. And then the item 6 of the agenda, this is what the agenda item was called. I haven't highlighted this, but respective outstanding questions by the Russian Federation to the US and Ukraine concerning fulfillment of respective obligations under the convention in the context of the operation of Biolabs in Ukraine. Okay. Now, let's come to the actual meat of this letter then. And the first thing I have highlighted here is the US Department of Defense, DOD. Now, why have I highlighted that? Well, if you look at the Russian, that's used, the word they use in the document is Военное ведомство США. And this is what their BWC delegate was saying. And when I did his first statement, I wasn't familiar with this letter, you see. And I think I said the US military, okay? And it was fine, okay, the US military. You might be inclined to say, okay, if you were going word for word, the US military department. But no, that is what they call the Department of Defense, the US Department of Defense. And you can call it the DOD, okay? Everyone knows that's a perfectly acceptable acronym to use for the US Department of Defense, the DOD. So just bear that in mind, okay, if you hear Военное ведомство. And then this next bit in blue, okay, in the Russian, вдали от североамериканского континента и вблизи от российских границ. The reason I highlighted that was, I think that is wording that Sergei Lavrov uses in his speech at the general debate this year in September. which was, of course, the subject of what was episode 151 that I will leave a link to. One of my record-breaking episodes it was to. I seem to remember him saying at some point, «Вдали от североамериканского континента». And in English, the phrasing is away from the North American continent and close to the Russian borders. The point is that the Russians are going to draw on this document a lot in their statements and quote it almost word for word, like the guy at the BWC was doing. Now, here's the name of another institution. Через Агентство по уменьшению угрозы Пентагона. Okay, very important. They're talking about this all the time. That is the Defense Threat Reduction Agency. You see there? Or DETRA. You can just call it DETRA. All right, but you need to... lots of countries seem to have this kind of agency nowadays, Threat Reduction Agency. So the US one's called Defense Threat Reduction Agency. One thing I'd say is here in the Russian you're given a acronym AUU. Now I must say I haven't yet heard them use the Russian acronym AUU, but be prepared. Maybe they will. If you hear AUU, that's DETRA. And now here we get fun here, some fun here. Постоянными подрядчиками военного ведомства США, в том числе Black and Veatch, Special Projects Corporation, CH2M Hill, and Metabiota. Well, now that we know how you should render военное ведомство США, okay, we now know the English would probably read the permanent contractors, подрядчики, very important these days to know that word, of the DOD, including these three corporations. And this is very important because, again, in the BWC, in the meeting, the first couple of days, the guy, he talked about Black and Veatch, the Black and Veatch Corporation. I'd never bloody heard of it. I was like, what? I mean, he said it in English. English is quite good, so I more or less tried to just repeat what I thought he said. I thought he said Black and Veatch or something. Anyway, he was fine with it. I think he was monitoring, but whatever. I said it okay. But obviously, it's good to know, to be prepared, to know that you're going to be hearing the names of these companies. This second one, CH2M Hill, I've not heard them referred to. Metabiota, I have. So yeah, Metabiota, I've come across that name. I think it might. They were perhaps, I think, the most well known. I think they've got alleged links with the whole Biden's son, Hunter Biden, Burisma, all those sort of allegations that came out prior to the last elections. Okay, so I think Metabiota are one of those corporations that is well known for its contractual work in Ukraine. That's the one. That one I had heard of actually, but these other two, Black and Veatch, had not. CH2M Hill, no. Okay, paragraph 2. Now I've just highlighted confidence building measures because that's a very important concept. Generally, I mean, they talk about a lot in the BWC, and they're known as CBMs. You also have this thing called TCBMs, transparency and confidence building measures. You'll hear in some context, but certainly in the when it comes to the BWC, they talk about these CBMs a lot, and the Russian equivalent is мер укрепления доверия. Okay. One other thing I'd just say here, now that I look at it, talking of acronyms, KBTO. Okay, that's the Russian acronym, as you can see here, for the BWC, not to be confused. As you might, if you're not very experienced in dealing with these conventions, don't confuse it with the CTBT in English, the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty. Okay, the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty in Russian is Дзяй, Договор по запрещению ядерных испытаний. Okay, that's the CTBT. KBTO here, BWC. All right, keep them well apart, because I have had that happen a few years ago when I think I heard KBTO and I said CTBT, and it was boom, like big mistake, and the guy corrected me. Yeah, so watch out for that. Okay, so there's some more wording here that comes up. В целях предотвращения или сокращения случаев возникновения неясностей, сомнений и подозрений. So this is direct. I think this is direct quoting from a document, but that I've run into quite a few times. So maybe you would say, let's say you just, I mean, you know, it's also useful to think how you would say it if you didn't have the document, it was just coming at you and you had to think on your feet, you know, to prevent and reduce cases of the emergence, whenever I see возникновение, I say emergence of, now see, I remember this is ambiguities, doubts and suspicions, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, in order to prevent or reduce the occurrence, okay, so возникновение is occurrence here of ambiguities, doubts and suspicions. My go-to for возникновение is usually emergence, but okay, here it's occurrence. And again, this is a thing they said, the Russians, such secrecy and neglect of Russian claims by the United States, I think you probably want to say all but confirm their validity. So this is very much, you can tell that this is Russian syntax that's been put into English, and the original is подобная скрытность и игнорирование со стороны США российских претензий лишь подтверждают их обоснованность. Okay, so just good to know. So for skrytnost, what did they say? Secrecy. I think he might have used this the first time when I hadn't seen the document, and I was, you know, just trying to process these words. I think this covertness, I maybe said. Now, with ignorирование is a tricky one because you can't say ignorance, because ignorance is something different in English, right? And I think so. Usually, when I hear ignorирование phrased like that as a noun, I might say disdain or neglect, and the Russians say, well, they say neglect. Okay, by the Russian claims only confirm their validity. Okay, I think when I heard it, when I was doing it the first time, I think I said they vindicate us. Подтверждают их обоснованность. I was, you know, he was speaking fast, so I was trying to keep up. I think I said this covertness and this neglect by the US, the Russian claims only vindicate us. So the wording in the Russian use is that they confirm their validity. So probably not a bad word to have for обоснованность, validity. Let's go down here. Again, important wording, несоблюдение США положения КБТО. So this is non-compliance by the US of the provisions of the BWC. Non-compliance, yes, with BWC provisions. Now, this gets tricky here. Paragraph 4. Okay, this was an agreement then between the Pentagon of the US and Ukraine in the sphere of совместных биологических исследований, определения угроз от биологических агентов и выработки ответа на них. So I thought this is again kind of wording that's going to creep up quite a bit. So you might be tempted to, and I think they actually skip it in the English. They skip it, you know, this bit for some reason. They just call it the agreement, okay? But what in English you might say joint biological research, defining threats from biological agents and developing responses thereto, is what you might say in English. And I thought this was a useful thing. Detection and response. Biological threat agent detection and response. Just interesting to see what the Russian is for that. Detection and response. Sorry, that was this sentence. This was actually it. Sorry. Определение угроз. Okay. Is detection. That's what they say for threat detection. Определение угроз. And response is just ответа на них. Now here the vocab starts to get very technical. Okay, well, let's just read it in the Russian and think about how we might put it into English. Хранит патогены только в лабораториях, которым оказывается содействие военным ведомствам США, а также направлять в Соединенные Штаты образцы всех штаммов, собранных на Украине, и данные наблюдения за распространением инфекционных заболеваний в этой стране. So that's really tricky, okay? And so here you need to be on top form with your vocab. And they say, I think they say to store pathogens only in labs that provide that receive assistance from the DoD, and also send to the US obrazci всех штаммов, samples of all strains collected in Ukraine, and the information from monitoring of the spread of infectious diseases in that country. Let's see what it says in the English. I think, again, I didn't have the text here, and I remember him talking about the obrazci всех штаммов. I was quite pleased at the time to have got samples and strains. Now, so the actual English that is used here is store all dangerous pathogens, хранить, to store, at laboratories assisted by the DoD, as well as transfer to the US. Here we got the copies of all strains. So they say, when you hear obrazci всех штаммов, they actually say copies of all strains collected in Ukraine and data generated by the infectious disease surveillance in that country. So it's interesting for me here, they go for surveillance, okay? So the Russian is дание наблюдений, so наблюдение, surveillance. You could, as I said monitoring, I was fine, but it's really good to know exactly the words the Russians use. So, and then here I actually just highlight this word here, rezultati. You might think, why have I highlighted the rezultat? That's a very interesting word. But it's interesting in the English equivalent, the deliverables. Now that's a very sort of in vogue word these days of the year, and they're often talking about deliverables. So it was just interesting for me to see what the equivalent was in Russian. Okay, and it was just boring old rezultati. But there you go. Particularly maybe if you're going into Russian for you, Russian A's, if you hear deliverables in English, you can probably just get away with saying rezultati. You don't need anything fancier than that. And this I thought was just by default, to see what the expression in Russian was for by default. So here, приобретают по умолчанию. Okay, I think when I heard him use this, because he was just quoting the sentence after sentence of this text, and we didn't have it. And I think I said tacitly, okay, по умолчанию, tacitly, which I think was okay, but it's interesting that the equivalent English would appear to be by default. Okay, now we're getting into the locations in paragraph 5 of some of these labs. So it's good, because I remember he listed a string of these big cities. So they're in Kiev, Lvov, Odessa, and Kharkov. And there's our friend again, Black and Veatch Special Projects Corporation. Paragraph 6 here, I highlighted registration card. I thought that might be an interesting concept, but in fact it's not really that interesting, because in the Russian it's just registraционная карта. So, okay, if you just like for like, really. Handling dangerous pathogens. Okay, in Russian, работа с опасными патогенами. Okay, again, nothing too exciting there. Paragraph 7. Sorry, I'm jumping around a bit here from the Russian to the English, but you guys should be able to follow it. This is again an institution that I've heard mentioned on more than one occasion. Научно-исследовательский противочумный институт Mechnikov в Odessa, the Mechnikov Institute. So the full English name is the I. Mechnikov Anti-Plague Scientific and Research Institute in Odessa. Okay, so that's one of those words that perhaps also this protivachumny is probably a word that you're not going to run into every day in meetings. So it's always just good to remember these kind of things. So Chuma, of course, is plague, the Anti-Plague Institute, the Mechnikov Anti-Plague Institute. And, oh God, we get really technical here, don't we? Look, 422 единицы хранения возбудителей холеры и 32 единицы хранения возбудителя сибирской язвы. All right. So this is going to separate the men from the boys now, some of these things, some of these diseases. So, okay, cholera, obviously. Now, what is Sibirskaya yazva? Well, you need to know this, because Sibirskaya yazva is anthrax. All right? 32 anthrax storage units. So this is what these things are. Единицы хранения. Okay, that's fairly straight. That's sort of speaks for itself, really, storage units. So yeah, remember this, Sibirskaya язва, that's come up a lot. So that's, you need to know that's anthrax, okay? Now, возбудитель, I was wanting to know what the, how they'd rendered возбудитель. And actually, in this instance, they don't render it at all, right? They just call it in the English version, cholera storage unit, anthrax storage units. We'll come back to that. And then here, look, this большого количества пробирок с одинаковыми штаммами разных пассажей. Now, what is that in English? I must admit, I didn't know this word, пробирок. I think I said samples again. So that's, yeah, it's a test tube. Test tubes that contained the same strains of different passages. Okay, let's look at that in the Russian again. Пробирок с одинаковыми штаммами разных пассажей. Now, the same strains of different passages. Now, with at some there's a point where you've just got to say, I haven't got a clue what you're talking about, mate. This was one of those moments, right, when I heard him talking, and I look at the English, and the English, as I say, is the same strains of different passages. That's double Dutch to me. I don't know what that means. However, at some point you just say to yourself, look, if the Russians are happy with that wording in the English, that's the wording that they have chosen, that means that's the wording they like, you just have to say, all right, I'm fine with that. If you're fine with that, I'm fine with that. And you just give them that. So maybe it makes perfect sense. If you've got a PhD or whatever, a degree in biological sciences, maybe this makes perfect sense to you. I don't know, the same strains of different passages. Again, way above my pay grade. But anyway, that's the wording. And if they're okay with that wording, then I'm all right with that wording. So you've just got to leave your pride at the front door and just just recognize your lack of knowledge of certain things, and yeah, just go with it. Go with the flow. Moving on to this paragraph 8, and then we've got some more diseases here. Let's see the Russian. Кор, полиомиелит, туберкулез, другие социально значимые инфекции. So, core, measles. All right, again, maybe not a word I think I knew it, but it's not a word you come into contact with that regularly. If you hear poliomyelitis, okay, just poliomyelitis. Tuberculosis is fairly straightforward. And here, okay, then here they use возбудитель again. Here, включает возбудители опасных инфекционных заболеваний. And my initial reaction was trigger, okay? But it seems that, when it comes to medical vocabulary, it includes pathogens. They call it pathogen, okay, of dangerous infectious diseases. And that's important. They use this word возбудитель a lot. So if you hear it and you want, I know they skipped it the first time round, but here it's pathogens of dangerous infectious diseases. Know that word, возбудители, because again, it comes up in this paragraph as well. Okay, now this paragraph 9, here we're going to get into a lot of hypothesizing, okay, as to what the Russians think that the US and the Ukraine are up to, what's behind all these, the sort of experimentation, okay. Now the first thing they talk about is this проектов UP4 и P781, okay, just useful to know that these are projects, okay, UP4 and P781, in case you run into them. At least, again, it's good to be prepared. If you suddenly hear these letters and numbers coming at you and you don't know any of the background to it, it could really throw you. But okay, now I've told you, okay, that they are making a direct reference to two specific projects. Now, what are these projects on? Let's go back to the Russian. Okay. Возможность распространения опасных инфекций через мигрирующих птиц. So this is again the sort of hypothesizing section. Okay, spreading dangerous infections through migratory birds and bats. Летучих мышей. Okay. Now he includes высокопатогенного гриппа и болезни Ньюкасла. Okay, so highly pathogenic flu, grippe, okay, and Newcastle disease. That is a thing. Newcastle disease is a disease, I believe, primarily found in livestock, in chickens. Okay, but presumably can it spread to humans? God knows these days what sort of diseases can and can't spread from animals to humans. God knows. And then he talks about, okay, в том числе способных инфицировать человека возбудителей чумы, лептоспироза, бруцеллеза, а также коронавирусов и filovírusов. Okay, so chumi, okay, plague again. Leptospirosis is well, let's see what they say in English again. It's good. Leptospirosis is how you pronounce it in English. Brucellosis is the other one. Leptospirosis, brucellosis. Okay, as well as our old friends coronaviruses and filoviruses. I'd not heard of filoviruses before, but there you go. That can be considered as a delivery means. So just what's the word in Russian? Okay, sredstva dostavki. So okay, just means of delivery means. And so yes, so here what did they use? What did they say for возбудители чумы? They said pathogens again here. Okay, pathogens of plague. So that's your go-to word, right, for возбудитель. Going on to para 11, now this is a reference to a patent number, big long patent number, 8,967,029 B1. Okay, good luck getting that if they spit that out to you in Russian high speed. But anyway, at least you know it's a reference to the patent. And what do you do if they talk if he says high speed, о патенте США номер 8,967,29 3 марта 2015 года, you just say the US patent of 3rd of March 2015. Don't bother about the number, okay? That's the short. That's how you deal with that number. You just give it the date, which he'll hopefully give you. And this is so Бюро США по патентам и товарным знакам. So that is the US Patent and Trademark Office. It's good to know that the name, the actual name of that institution, okay? So so that you're not sort of rummaging around in your head trying to think of what it might be. It's just remember that the name of that. It's an important institution, the US Patent and Trademark Office. Okay, back to the Russian. Беспилотный, okay, that patent is for на беспилотный летательный аппарат. Okay, that is an unmanned aerial vehicle, an UAV. And to be honest, whenever I hear about that, the first thing that comes to me is a drone. You can say a drone. I mean, okay, drone is maybe a more familiar name for it. The official name is a UAV, an unmanned aerial vehicle, but if you're in trouble, I think they'll let you off with a drone. And we're getting into high levels of hypothesis now, because this is sort of the Russian argument is that now what is this UAV used for? Okay, let's see in the Russian. Okay, для распространения в воздухе зараженных комаров. Okay, so the spread, the airborne spread of infected mosquitoes. So the aerial release of infected mosquitoes. And for a device, so again, let's have a look at the Russian, the full thing. На оборудование изделия, которое предназначается для использования в качестве технического средства доставки и применения биологического оружия, биологических и иммунобиологических агентов, бактерий, вирусов, в том числе высококонтагиозных которые могли бы уничтожить весь личный состав противника. So how would I do that in English? Okay, let's just say he was just quoting that at me, in English, and I was just having to wing it, So the airborne spread of infected mosquitoes on equipment that is designed to be used, предназначается для использования, or just to be used as a technical means of delivery and for the use of bioweapons, biological and immunobiological agents, bacteria, viruses, including highly contagious, which could destroy the whole crew, a whole enemy crew. Okay. Личный состав противника. Now the actual English they give is a device, so that was изделие or оборудование, designed to be applied as a technical means of delivery and use of a bioweapon, biological and immunobiological agents, bacteria and viruses, including highly contagious, that could wipe out 100% of the enemy troops. Okay, so it's Russian again. This is a Russian native, presumably, that's putting this into English. So it's the wording's a bit slightly wonky, but it's all right. It's all right. To wipe out the whole, what did they say for личный состав? They said, okay, just 100% of enemy troops. So here what's important is that you understand in your mind, you can visualize what the accusation is that they're using this drone that's carrying these, I don't know, samples. What are they carrying? Little bombs carrying these infections, and they're dropping, and they're dropping them in amongst the enemy so that those diseases spread, and it's biological warfare basically, isn't it? And so my point is that it's just good to have in your mind, to be able to visualize that in your mind, because let's say again he's speaking and he's using some very technical vocabulary, and you're struggling to process it word by word, but you know what he's talking about. You know he's referring to this scheme that the Russians are accusing the Ukrainians, the Americans of. You can sort of paraphrase it, okay? You can. Now, I don't tend to recommend paraphrasing. I don't recommend that at all as a general rule. People who paraphrase, interpreters who do a lot of paraphrasing, it tends to suggest they're not quite up to the job, because our job's not to paraphrase. Our job is really to try and keep as close to the original as possible. But there are certain exceptions where you've got something of such a highly technical nature, where you can get away with almost putting the actions into your own words. Okay, I think this would be such an occasion. If you've got an idea in your head, at least what the accusation is about, what they claim that those actions are, what they're doing, and you can put it into your own words, trying to stick as close as you can to the original words, but you get a bit of poetic license, as we say. That is an occasion when paraphrasing, you can get away with it. Okay, para 13. Okay, патент в США не может быть выдан в отсутствие исчерпывающего описания фактического устройства. So again, I just thought so a patent in the US can't be issued in the absence of exhaustive description of the actual machine. Is that what it is? Patent cannot be issued in the US unless a complete description of the actual machine is provided. Okay, that's useful to know, right? You need to basically... Patent really can't be issued without having the machine itself. And that second bit... Контейнер как средство доставки биоагентов был разработан и может быть оперативно произведен. So the container as a means of delivery of bioagents was developed and can be produced. So whenever I hear оперативно, I tend to say swiftly. Okay, I was just interested that in the English, it follows that a container as a bioagent delivery means has been developed and can be manufactured on the fly for оперативно. See, I always think that on the fly is slightly colloquial, It's interesting. I think that the Russians have put that into this document on the fly, and maybe when I hear operativno, again, if the Russians are happy with on the fly operativno, could experiment, give it a try. Here we're getting to the end. This is that we've done the most important stuff here, I think. Аналитических докладах Херсонского управления службы безопасности Украины. So this is documentation that sort of lends credibility, I guess, to the accusations in the document. The analytical reports of the Kherson Department of the Security Service of Ukraine. So just be aware that those might get cited. Some more wording here. Контроль за функционированием микробиологических лабораторий Украины по исследованию патогенов инфекционных заболеваний, которые могут быть использованы для создания и модернизации биологического оружия. Again, so control, when you have in Russian, my go-to tends to be oversight over the functioning of microbiological labs in Ukraine that are researching infectious disease pathogens that could be used to create or modernize bioweapons. Is that more or less? Okay, but they say control here, control over the functioning. Maybe I'm mixing up with French. Contrôle, that tends to be oversight. Control, okay. Control over the functioning of microbiological labs in Ukraine conducting research on pathogens of infectious diseases that can be used to create or modernize bioweapons. And then this final bit. Создавала предпосылки для проникновения в региональные биолаборатории иностранных специалистов и их ознакомления со стратегическими разработками. So created prerequisites, предпосылка, prerequisites, preconditions for penetration into regional biolabs of foreign specialists, and they're becoming familiar with strategic developments there. Created similar created prerequisites for foreign specialists to penetrate into regional biolabs, familiarize themselves with strategic developments. Again, it's just useful to know what the Russians consider to be the appropriate wording, because again, that's one of their main arguments here, that foreign specialists are up to, that basically the US and the foreign powers are up to their necks in all the activities going on in those biolabs. So that is the document there. So as I say, for me, I think that's crucial. So much wording here, crucial vocabulary in just these 2.5 pages, that that it will really set you up nicely if you encounter a meeting where the Russians or whoever it may be, turn the focus on the activities in those biolabs. You have an idea, exactly what are they alleging, where's it going on, and those things that are going on in those labs. What's the bigger picture? What's the actual strategic objective of all those activities there? So I'm going to leave links to all this documentation, okay, so that you can see it for yourself. If you have found it a useful episode, please do tell me about it in the comments. Also, if you think you have better ideas, better solutions for some of the stuff I've given you, I'd love to hear from you. What I say is not the gospel by any means. It's just my reading of what's going on, based on my experience, based on my time doing these meetings, okay? But if you maybe you know better than me, so, and I want to learn. I too want to learn from you. So if you've got better ideas, please do put them in the comments below. That's basically it, guys. That's basically it. Like, share, subscribe, as I said at the start, and nothing else really left to be said other than, it's the big match tonight. What have we got? France versus England. Must say, I really don't care. Don't care who wins. Couldn't care less. And right now, who's playing? It's Morocco-Portugal. That'd be nice for the Moroccans to win, perhaps. They get an Arab country in the semis. Why not? It's a bit more interesting if you've got South American team, Arab team, 2 European teams. It's a bit more, makes it a bit more interesting. I think last time around there was just 4 European teams in the semis, and it was all a bit predictable. So Yeah, come on, Morocco, and come on, France and England. What did I say? I don't care. All right, nothing more left to be said other than that episode 155 of the Interpretation Station stands adjourned.
The train is now leaving the Interpretation Station. We hope you enjoyed your visit. Until next time.